Emily was invisible to almost everyone at Stratton Technologies, quietly trailing 6 steps behind her mother, Linda, who moved through the marble and glass hallways with the silent efficiency of someone who knew she did not truly belong there. While other kids her age spent afternoons playing tag in the park or learning their ABCs, Emily's world revolved around worn notebooks filled with sketches of circuits and any broken gadget she could find in the maintenance closets. More than once, she had pried open an old radio someone tossed out, fascinated by the wires and tiny parts inside, just to put them back together, or at least try. Emily found comfort in the hush of those big halls, seeing possibility where others saw only junk. Her world was one of forgotten details: the zipper on her backpack that never quite closed, the cracked USB drive she held onto just in case, and the way she'd sit quietly on the bench in the lobby, head down, pencils at the ready, while her mother disappeared behind the service elevators to start her shift. In that quiet place, Emily let herself dream, sketching inventions that seemed impossible, imagining that one day she might also find her place in that world of screens, code and endless ideas. That morning, Emily sat on her usual bench, knees pulled up, focused on her notebook where she was drawing a motherboard that, in her mind, could send messages to cell phones through the air. She imagined tiny signals bouncing around the inside of Stratton Technologies, reaching the very top floors where people made decisions she only heard about in passing. Around her, the sounds of the morning, hurried footsteps, snatches of urgent conversations, the click of tablet covers closing, were all just background noise. They barely registered as she carefully labeled imaginary chips and connectors, lost in her own quiet world. Then, without any warning, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, and finally went dark. In those first few seconds, a strange, hushed tension filled the lobby. Emily froze, pencil in hand, as a wave of anxious voices rose all around. Grown-ups pulled out their cell phones, their screens lighting up their worried faces, while some hurried toward the security desk. The word breach shot through the crowd, whispered and then shouted, echoing off the polished stone. Emily didn't move. Instead, she sat perfectly still, wide-eyed, soaking up every piece of the scene. To her, it felt like a puzzle only she could see. The world suddenly turned on its side, filled with clues waiting to be understood. As the scene unfolded, Emily kept to her quiet corner, watching the engineers and executives rush by with growing urgency. Their pressed suits and badges, always so intimidating, now seemed powerless compared to the chaos that surrounded them. A group of them clustered around a monitor behind the security desk, frantically tapping keys and exchanging short, tense words. Someone kept saying, "Try again. Someone call IT." But the screen stayed stubbornly dark. Emily saw a senior manager shaking her head as another tried to call an outside server, only to stare in frustration at a phone with no signal. In her notebook, Emily scribbled the phrase "client presentation" next to her motherboard sketch. She had heard snippets of grown-up talk earlier. An important pitch was scheduled that morning on the top floor. The blackout was more than just an inconvenience. The longer Emily watched the adults repeating the same steps, the more she found herself thinking that the answers they needed were not in those routines. No one stopped to look around or try anything new. They just cycled through menus and procedures as if they were following a script they barely understood. For the first time, Emily felt a strange confidence. Maybe, just maybe, she was the only one in that building seeing the real picture, the only one not distracted by panic, and the only one ready to notice what others missed. The confusion in the lobby kept swelling, voices overlapping as new employees joined the scene, and more electronics were hauled out in a desperate attempt to fix the mess. Emily, sitting on her bench with her battered backpack at her feet, started putting all the scattered pieces together, not just wires and circuits, but the snatches of technical talk she overheard. She caught words like malware, kernel, and vector, terms she had come across before while tinkering on old computers at home with her mum's donated tech from thrift stores. All those late nights fiddling with broken laptops, watching videos about system failures, and experimenting with ways to bring dead machines back now seemed strangely relevant. Veer slipped away as her thoughts sharpened. Emily realized something important. Nothing in the system was actually gone. Instead, it seemed frozen, locked behind some invisible barrier. People around her kept treating it like a disaster, but in her experience, big machines were sometimes like tired engines, just waiting for the right switch or reset. Her fingers itched to be the one who tried. Under that marble ceiling, with adults still spiraling, Emily felt the weight of the challenge. Yet for the first time that day, she felt fully ready, as if every small repair she had ever done had been preparing her for exactly this moment. The cluster of engineers in the middle of the lobby looked like they could have been at any busy tech event in downtown Boston. Their badges were twisted, ties half loosened, and a few were talking over each other. Everyone convinced they had the answer to what had brought Stratton Technologies to a sudden halt. A tall man in glasses was certain it was a ghost protocol slipped in through the wireless network. Another woman, tapping her stylus, was sure the trouble was an infected email. Through this haze of arguments, Emily inched closer, quietly tuning into the words being shot back and forth. She listened to talk about overflowing loops, socket errors, and phantom data packets, all things she'd read about on late nights spent scrolling through tech forums and watching how-to videos on rebuilding motherboards. Something clicked in her brain. Almost without thinking, Emily whispered, "Did you check the socket overflow loop?" Her voice was small, but it carried into a sudden lull. The reaction was instant. A few engineers chuckled, clearly amused that a kid thought she could contribute, while others just ignored her. But across the tangled group, Ryan, a young intern with coffee stains on his shirt, looked up and met her eyes. There was no condescension there. Ryan saw someone who might actually be onto something. Ryan did not laugh or roll his eyes. Instead, he straightened up and spoke out for Emily's idea. "Actually, it makes sense," he said to the others, his tone calm but steady. "None of us has managed to get past the current block, and her suggestion lines up with the symptoms we're seeing." A hush fell over the group. For the first time, Emily was not just a quiet kid waiting for her mom. She was someone to pay attention to. Even the lead engineer, who moments earlier had been dismissing everything, paused and frowned thoughtfully at the words "socket overflow loop." Around them, the rest of the lobby buzzed with frustration, but something had shifted at the cluster by the security desk. Some of the techs, eager for any solution, moved to check the code again. Still, the older engineers remained skeptical, exchanging looks that flickered between annoyance and worry. They did not want to admit a young outsider could have noticed what they all missed. Emily quietly retreated to the shadow of a marble column, heart pounding, but a small hope lighting in her chest. She knew she had at least shaken their confidence. Opened the door just a crack, as the group murmured about what to try next. She watched, certain that things would start to change from this moment onward. After what felt like hours, but was really only 20 minutes, the team of engineers finally let Emily step up to the terminal. They were worn down by the mess and by their own frustration more than anything else. The head of IT, a man named Marcus, who had been barking orders the whole time, tried to play it cool, but could not resist a sarcastic remark. "Well, maybe the cleaner's kid will save us since no one else could," he joked, earning a few nervous chuckles from his tired co-workers. The jab stung, but Emily refused to let it rattle her. She was used to people underestimating her or her mom, Ms. Carter, who had worked every shift in that building for as long as Emily could remember. Ryan slid over a wheeled chair and gave her the kind of encouraging smile that needed no words. Emily climbed into the chair, feet barely brushing the floor, and settled her fingers on the keyboard. She did not need directions. and she did not hesitate. The familiar hum of the computer under her hands felt like home, screens filled with error messages and lines of code. But she moved through them quickly, her mind piecing together the broken pattern as if she had solved this kind of problem 100 times before. Emily's fingers moved quickly and steadily across the keys, making purposeful choices instead of just guessing or repeating what others had already tried. She did not waste time with the same commands the engineers had hashed over again and again. Instead, she slipped through the menus and deep settings, recalling scraps of code and odd backdoor tricks she had seen online or worked out on battered desktops at home. She was not following any textbook rule. Her actions came from paying close attention and really noticing how things responded. It was almost like she could see the system's pathways in her mind, as if someone had drawn her a secret map. Within minutes, Emily managed to unlock folders and settings the professional team had not even found. The methods she used were quiet, not flashy, but as error messages vanished and new options blinked onto the screen, the room itself seemed to change. Every conversation faded, replaced by a stunned quiet. All the adults who had doubted her were now glued to her every move, watching in disbelief as she worked through barrier after barrier. Where there had been nervous laughter and mocking a moment before, now there was just silent awe. Emily kept going, fully in her element, knowing she was finally where she belonged. With every new layer she cracked, Emily found herself pulled even deeper into the heart of the system, almost forgetting there was a crowd watching over her shoulder. The attack was more than random code. It was full of hidden tricks and familiar signatures, like the mark of someone who loved a challenge as much as she did. It felt almost personal, as if the attacker had built this digital maze, knowing only a certain type of mind would reach the end. She caught bits of old code she'd seen in underground forums and recognized traps that would snag anyone who moved too quickly or without thinking. Far from being intimidated, Emily was energized by the puzzle. She read the subtleties as if the hacker had left clues just for her. Her hands flew over the keyboard, steady and quick, each command taking her another step closer. At first, a few people still whispered doubts, but as more progress rolled out on the screen, even the toughest skeptics started inching forward for a better look. The mood changed. Instead of scoffing, the room crackled with the thrill that something big, maybe even a breakthrough, was about to happen. Emily could feel the hope around her building with every move she made. Upstairs, in an office that looked over the Boston skyline, Charles Thompson, the CEO of Stratton Technologies, paced nervously between his wide mahogany desk and the huge windows. His phone kept buzzing with messages about plummeting usage rates and a dozen missed calls from investors, some from New York, others from San Francisco, who were demanding explanations he did not have. Around him, his directors threw out ideas and theories, each one as hopeful and empty as the last. No one had any real answers, and pressure was mounting by the minute. When Charles heard that a child, just a middle school kid from maintenance, was downstairs trying to reboot the whole system, he could barely believe it. His first instinct was frustration mixed with embarrassment. He immediately called security, insisting someone get down there and put an end to this potential disaster. For Charles, reputation was everything, especially with so much money on the line. But when he stormed downstairs and finally caught sight of Emily, it was not what he expected to see at all. There she was, completely focused on the glowing monitors, surrounded by a frozen crowd. Something about her quiet confidence made him pause. He could not quite explain it. But for a moment, his anger was replaced with curiosity. The atmosphere in the lobby grew heavier as two security guards walked in, looking unsure but serious, obviously ready to step in and pull Emily away from the computer. They glanced toward Charles, waiting for a clear order. Instantly, Ryan put himself between Emily and the guards. He spoke up, his voice surprisingly steady, for someone who had been quiet most of the afternoon. "She's not causing problems. She's doing actual work. None of the rest of us have managed even half of what she's done," he said, not backing down an inch. Some of the engineers, who had watched Emily progressing through roadblocks they could not crack, nodded in agreement, their hushed voices spreading through the crowd. There was a tense moment where no one seemed to know what would happen next. But then Charles, who had come down expecting to call everyone off, hesitated as he saw the real, steady improvement on the screen. The status lights on the main control panel were slowly changing from red to yellow and then to green. The engineers exchanged glances, and even a few higher-ups in business suits were now watching with real interest. For the first time, everyone took a step back and let Emily lead. It was clear, even to the people in charge, that something important was taking place, and only she could carry it forward. Emily leaned in closer to the monitor, blocking out the rest of the world. The noises in the room faded as she moved through the last tangled parts of the code. She started seeing patterns and odd fixes that felt oddly familiar. It was like recognizing the handwriting of someone you had never met, but somehow understood. She picked up hints in how things were ordered, tiny shortcuts slipped into the lines by whoever built this attack. The sort of tricks only people who had taught themselves would use. Each new clue made her heart beat a little faster. It was like a silent conversation, reaching across the computer screen, Emily on one side, this unknown hacker on the other. Then it hit her. This was not just some random malware sent to mess things up. Someone out there knew that only an outsider, someone who broke the usual rules, could make sense of this jumble. It was almost like an invitation, an open dare for the right person to solve it. A chill ran through Emily as she realized the attack was almost talking directly to her. For the first time, she felt afraid, not because she thought she might fail, but because she honestly had no idea who or what would be waiting for her if she managed to push through to the very end. Even though she felt uneasy, Emily pressed forward, caught between curiosity and the sense that everyone in the room was depending on her now. Every new section of code seemed to pull her along, the old fear replaced by something more like determination. She realized that if she quit now, no one else would be able to follow this trail. The clues meant nothing to the seasoned professionals, but she could see the pattern beneath. With each click and keystroke, it felt more and more like a conversation, wordless, but real. Almost as if the person behind the attack was right there on the other side, challenging her to keep going. Ryan, who had been keeping a careful eye on Emily, noticed the shift in her focus. He leaned in quietly so as not to startle her, and softly asked, "Emily, have you found something?" She barely looked up, but her answer was barely louder than a whisper. "I think I know who did this," she said. "Someone like me." The words hung in the air for a moment, settling between them like a weight. Around them, the room seemed to pulse with the new understanding. Emily's challenge was no longer just technical. It was now something far more personal and meaningful. As Emily struck the final command, the last big flaw in the system flickered and then started setting itself right. A series of status messages scrolled down the screen, each one announcing another section back online. For a second, there was stunned silence in the lobby. Then people started whispering to each other, and the news traveled faster than anyone could have predicted. It was not long before the entire building was buzzing with the story. The janitor's daughter had just turned everything around and saved Stratton Technologies. From the IT office on the third floor to the marketing team near the entrance, faces poked out of doorways and messages bounced through co-workers' group chats. Who would have imagined that the quiet girl who always walked the halls after school with her mom would be the one to pull them back from total disaster? But among the celebration, Charles did not join in. He kept his eyes on Emily, noticing for the first time the deep focus and steady nerves it had taken to get through that mess. He could hardly make sense of what he was feeling, some mix of awe and confusion. Like a door had quietly opened on a new way of thinking about skill and who actually brings value to a place. It felt like everything had shifted, not just in the company's servers, but in his own mind about what was possible. That night, long after the building had emptied out and every last office light had been switched off, Charles stayed behind in his corner office, staring at the city lights below. He kept replaying the scene of Emily in front of that terminal, stuck in his mind like something he could not let go of. The way she moved, the choices she made, and how steady she seemed even when everyone else was lost. It all spoke of a different kind of confidence. It reminded him of himself, way back when he was just a kid with a battered radio, taking things apart just to see how they worked, hoping the world would make sense if he could get inside it. Out of nowhere, buried memories began to resurface. He saw flashes of a young girl, a version of himself maybe, sitting on the steps outside an orphanage in Pittsburgh, holding a broken radio to her ear. She would twist the dials, hoping to catch some distant signal, searching for something just out of reach. The connection between his own past and what he had witnessed in Emily was so clear it was almost unsettling. Now, guilt crept in for how far he had wandered from that early curiosity, and a real hope flickered that maybe, this time, he could do things better. The next morning, Emily got a call asking her to return to Stratton Technologies. This time, she did not just blend in with employees and cleaning staff. She was at the center of everything. There was no grand announcement or anything like that. Someone simply met her at the front door and led her through quiet hallways straight to a windowless conference room. Inside, a small group of people waited, most of them senior engineers and managers, plus Charles, sitting at the end of the table. The mood was serious, but there was also real curiosity in the air. The questions started coming almost as soon as she sat down. People wanted the details, how she had figured out what nobody else could, what rules she had followed, if there were steps they had missed. Emily paused, taking a deep breath. It was hard to put into words exactly how her mind worked. She admitted as much, looking down for a moment before pulling out her notebook. Flipping to a blank page, she started drawing the logic patterns and little diagrams that had helped her visualize the whole mess. The room grew still as her pen moved. The shapes and lines were so clear, so deeply thought out, that nobody interrupted. Even the most seasoned engineers traded glances, realizing that what they were seeing was a kind of thinking none of them had expected. Charles studied Emily's notebook with an intensity he reserved for only the most gripping problems. Her sketches were not just technical diagrams. They were almost like a map of the way her mind worked. There were lines that curved naturally instead of following sharp angles, and pieces that looped back on themselves, as if making sure nothing ever got left behind. He noticed sections where she had drawn alternate routes for signals, giving the system ways out if something went wrong. Where other engineers would force a straight fix, Emily's solutions were always flexible. Each part of her drawing seemed to say that every piece, even the smallest, had a place and a backup plan. Sitting there, Charles realized these drawings were more than a fix to a technical mess. They were proof of a different way to see things, one that the company's finely tuned hiring and promotion system had probably overlooked dozens of times. For the first time, he felt like his old standards for what it meant to be a leader or to have value at work were not quite enough. Watching Emily explain her ideas, he stopped seeing her as an exception. Instead, he thought of her as living proof that the best problem solvers often come from outside the usual paths. Inspired by what he had learned, Charles decided to pay a visit to Emily's home that same week. It was a modest apartment in a quiet Pittsburgh neighborhood, not the kind of place where you would expect big breakthroughs to happen. As soon as he stepped inside, he was struck by the creative chaos that filled the small space. Old radios, broken keyboards, and circuit boards filled the kitchen table, and every shelf was stacked with half-built gadgets or things waiting to be fixed. Instead of disorder, though, there was an energy in the room, an unspoken understanding that everything here had some kind of use. Emily's mom, Rosa, greeted Charles warmly and offered him tea. Emily's adoptive brother, Tyler, popped out from behind a mountain of cables, curious about the guest. In just a short time, Charles realized what he had seen at the office was only a piece of a bigger picture. Emily did not solve problems because of any fancy lessons or certificates. She had learned because she had to, out of pure necessity and a stubborn curiosity that would not let her give up. In their world, broken things were never useless. They were chances to learn something new. As Charles made his way out, he carried with him a quiet but growing drive to shake up the way Stratton Technologies thought about talent and opportunity. The very next day, back at Stratton Technologies, Charles sat at his desk with a new clarity. He pulled up the company's policies for internships and scholarships and started making some big changes. Out went the strict rules about age, university degrees, and all those hoops that seemed to shut the door on so many bright minds. He wanted people like Emily, not just those with polished resumes, but the ones who fixed old radios in their kitchens and saw possibility in what others tossed out. He set up a special fund to support students from backgrounds like hers, and even chose to name the rebuilt firewall after Emily so that everyone would remember who had saved them when it mattered. Even with all these changes, Charles knew there was something missing. He realized that flipping some rules on paper was not enough. There needed to be a real connection. So he called Emily and Rosa and invited them for a direct conversation. It was not about formality or giving a fancy speech. He wanted to give them real support, with open access to every lab in the building, with his own one-on-one help when they needed it, and with all the freedom they wanted to keep learning in their own creative ways. He hoped this invitation would make room for something deeper than just a thank you. When Charles finished explaining everything about the labs, the mentorship, and the freedom to learn, Emily sat quietly for a moment, looking thoughtful. Rosa squeezed her hand and waited too, not wanting to interrupt. Finally, Emily leaned forward and asked in a steady voice, "Will I be allowed to keep breaking things?" The question caught Charles a little off guard, but he grinned, remembering her diagrams and her kitchen full of wires. His answer was warm and certain. Yes, that's how we figure out what's inside. That simple exchange broke any last bit of tension in the room, and you could feel something new starting, like the ground tilting just enough for all kinds of ideas to roll in. Over the following months, Emily became a familiar face around Stratton Technologies. She was no longer just a kid who happened to fix something nobody else could. She was part of the team. Engineers who had ignored her before now came to her for advice or just to watch her work. Some started bringing their own kids in to see what she was building. Every meeting, every project started to feel different, as if the old walls around who could contribute were finally coming down. Emily's story spread, and it reminded everyone that real talent sometimes waits in the background, just needing the right moment and an open door to shine.